I have known Mrs. Cecily Hawthorne since she was a girl of 12, when her father brought her to Sunday services in a cart pulled by a lame pony, and she still managed to arrange the altar flowers before anyone else arrived. She had that quality even then, a quiet usefulness the world perpetually overlooked. When she married young Hawthorne, I thought the man had found more than he deserved. When he died of a fever 3 winters later and left her with almost nothing, I was as not surprised that society promptly forgot she existed. I mention this because it was I who drove her to the Pemberton wedding in April. She had been invited, I suspect, out of an obligation so old it had calcified into mere habit. The Pembertons are distant cousins of her late husband, and they seat the unimportant early so the important may arrive late and be seen arriving. Cecily and I arrived at 11:15 and were shown to a bench near the side aisle. Not quite the back, but close enough that I could hear the draft through the vestibule door. She sat very straight. She wore a gray silk that had been turned and re-hemmed, which I noticed because I noticed everything that morning and wished I could do more than notice. Around us the pews filled with lace and feathers, and the low, self-satisfied murmur of people who know they belong where they are standing. 3 women Cecily had once called friends swept past our bench without a word. A 4th glanced at her and then glanced away with the particular speed that is worse than any open cut. It was somewhere during the processional that I became aware of a disturbance at the end of our row. Not a loud disturbance, the man was far too controlled for that. He simply appeared, as certain men do, filling the air around him before he quite filled the space. Tall, dark coat of a quality that needed no ornament. The kind of face that has decided, somewhere in its late 30s, not to offer anyone an easy expression. Lord Edvard Crane, the Duke of Ashenvale. He was known in 3 counties as the most feared landlord in the north, a man whose silences were said to be more punishing than other men's speeches. He was also, if the rumors were correct, the target of a scheme. The bride's elder sister, a Miss Portia Pemberton, had been engineering circumstances all season to have herself placed at his right hand at every conceivable social occasion. The rumor was that she intended to manufacture a compromise situation before the day was out. I had heard this from my housekeeper, who heard it from the Pembertons' cook, which is to say I heard it as gospel. Ashenvale had clearly heard it too. He stood at the end of our row, surveying the pews with the expression of a man calculating an escape route, and found there was none. Miss Portia Pemberton was already making her way along the opposite aisle with the focused intention of a woman who has rehearsed this moment. He sat down beside Cecily Hawthorne. It was so unexpected that I, on her other side, nearly dropped my order of service. He leaned toward her, and I heard him say, in a voice pitched to carry no further than her ear, "I find myself in need of a small kindness, Mrs. Hawthorne. If you would permit me to sit with you and your companion, and if you could bear to behave, for the length of this service, as though we are old acquaintances, I would be deeply in your debt." I watched her face. She turned to look at him with those steady gray eyes of hers, and I saw her take the measure of him in a single unhurried glance. The discomfort he was hiding, the pride that made it cost him something to ask, and the genuine decency beneath both. "You know my name," she said. "Your late husband and I shared a tutor for 2 years at the age of 9, he said. "I attended his funeral. You may not have noticed." "I noticed," she said quietly. "You stood at the very back and left before the bell finished." A pause that I thought contained more than either of them expected. Then she folded her hands in her lap and said, quite simply, "Old acquaintances." Then, Your Grace. Miss Portia Pemberton, I am pleased to report, arrived at our row to find it entirely full. Through the service he sat like a man enduring a siege, and Miss Pemberton's gaze upon our bench could have lit kindling. When the first hymn was given out, Cecily tilted her open book toward him without being asked. He took the other edge of it, and I heard him murmur, "You are doing me a greater kindness than you know, madam." "Then repay it by singing properly, Your Grace," she said. The second line rises. "I will swear before any bishop in England that the most feared man in the North very nearly smiled." What followed over the next 6 weeks I can only describe as a comedy that did not know it was becoming something else. Ashenvale called on Cecily 3 days after the wedding, ostensibly to thank her. He stayed 2 hours, debating the management of tenant housing in the northern counties. Opinions she had formed from reading reports I had lent her. "You disagree with my steward," he said at one point, in the tone of a man encountering a new species. "Your steward has never wintered in one of those cottages," she said. "I have sat with the families who do." He left looking, as my housekeeper put it, as if someone had surprised him. He called again the following week, with his steward's revised plans under his arm, and the week after that. He brought her twice to evening concerts and once to a dinner at Lady Marrowfield's house, where the table had been arranged by someone who did not know they were not, in fact, betrothed. He did not correct the arrangement. Neither did she. I sat at the far end and observed, which is the particular privilege of vicars and furniture. I watched him at those evenings the way I watch a man in a sermon who has suddenly heard something he did not expect to hear. The slight stiffening, the involuntary attention. He watched her hands when she spoke. He listened to her with a completeness that most men reserve for financial reports. When a Lord Selborne made a remark about young widows learning their place, Ashenvale set down his glass with a precision that was somehow louder than a shout, and said something so quietly that only those nearest heard it. Lord Selborne did not repeat the remark. It was at the Harwich garden party 6 weeks on that I saw the moment clearly. Cecily had been cornered near the rose trellises by 2 of the wedding ladies, who were deploying the particular cruelty of women who say kind things in a tone that means the opposite. Ashenvale was across the lawn. I watched him locate her, read her face from 40 feet, and begin moving. He did not hurry. That was what I remember. A hurrying man betrays calculation. He simply crossed the grass, as though that corner of the garden were always where he had meant to be, offered her his arm without a word of explanation, and said to the ladies, in a pleasant voice that was somehow final, "You will forgive us, Mrs. Hawthorne has promised me this walk." She had promised him no such thing, but she took his arm. They walked to the far wall, where an old stone bench looked out over the ha-ha and the soft green of the summer fields. I found an excuse to move closer. There is a particular rose specimen near that bench that I have always admired, and I will confess I was near enough to hear. Not clearly, but near enough. I heard him say, "I have been thinking about what I asked of you at the wedding, whether it was fair." She said something I could not catch. He said, "The pretense, I mean, whether you found it objectionable." A silence. Then her voice, thoughtful and even. I found it very easy to maintain. Another pause. The kind that changes the shape of a conversation. "As did I," he said, and his voice was different in it. Quieter, less governed. The voice of a man who has stopped choosing his words and let a true one through. Rather too easy, in fact, for a pretense. I looked away at that point. Some things do not want a witness, even a kind one. He came to me in August, unannounced, and stood in my study turning his hat in his hands like a man before a tribunal. "You have known her longest," he said at last. "I am told I am difficult, cold. I hear it often enough that it is likely true. I would rather remain alone all my life than have her accept me out of gratitude, or want, or any reason but the one." The hat went around once more. "Tell me honestly, could a woman like that come to care for a man like me? I have given much counsel in that study. I have rarely enjoyed any of it so much." "Your Grace," I said, "she corrected your singing in church. A woman does not trouble to improve a man she feels nothing for." She said yes in September, in the garden of the old rectory, where I have kept a pair of chairs for 30 years. He asked her with the windows of the parlor open and the apples coming in, and I heard none of it, but I saw their faces when they came inside for tea. Hers bright with a thing she had stopped hoping for, his with the particular undone quality of a feared man who has found the one person he was unable to frighten. I married them in November. The church was full. Miss Portia Pemberton was not present. At the vows, his voice, that famous instrument of fear in 3 counties, faltered on the word cherish, and she carried him through it, with nothing more than those steady gray eyes that had first taken his measure in April. When I spoke the words of the blessing over them, I thought of that gray April morning and the draft through the vestibule door, and a woman in turned silk sitting very straight on a bench near the side aisle, and a man who had asked a small kindness and received, without either of them quite knowing it, the one true and lasting thing. It is a privilege in this life to watch 2 people find their way to what was always meant to be.